want to go to Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, how are we doing? How are you? Oh, Dinesh, are you there, sir?
Yes, I'm here.
I'm sorry, we put you up as I was saying hello, so you probably didn't hear it. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm obviously thrilled with the results, and what an astounding comeback by Trump. And I got to say, I'm really enjoying this the meltdown that's coming from the left. Jubilation is one thing, but a little bit of Schadenfreude, which is taking pleasure in other people's misery. I do live for that.
Yeah, I know. It definitely feels good. One could argue it's not a good thing, but it definitely feels good. There's no doubt about that. Do you think the media, because it's been one of the big points we've making today, is that it's very obvious now that the media influence is a fraction of what it was. And the road to the White House no longer goes through Meet the Press. It now goes through Joe Rogan as a metaphor and reality. Do you think the media will have a moment of actual reflection and change their ways moving forward?
I think this was the message that Jeff Bezos and the guy who runs the LA Times were trying to send, although in a very muted way. Bezos would have been wise to say, hey, listen, the problem is we cover Trump in such a twisted, one-sided, biased way that we are only speaking to half the country, if that. Instead, he said, well, we're doing a great job, but we are perceived as biased, almost as if faulting the perceivers for holding a grudge against the media. So that's a way to evade responsibility, because Bezos seemed to say, well, if we don't endorse Trump, then we are going to somehow correct this perception of bias and going to be taken to be the trusted sources we are. That would be delusion. So I think the media is at a fork in the road. They can go down the road of realism, or they can go down the road of continuing delusion.
Okay. And whatever they decide, as their influence wanes, I guess matters less and less. I guess maybe a bigger question right now is, what does the deep state, what does permanent Washington do with this news, let's say from now until January 20th and then January 21st and beyond?
So I suspect right now what they're doing is they're all going into their devices and they're hitting delete. In other words, they're trying to.
You mean with a cloth? Or they're rubbing it with a cloth?
I think they're going to try to evade responsibility. They're going to do their best to. They're snakes, and they're good at what they do. So they will slither into some pretty deep holes, and they're going to hope that they are not detected, not rooted out, that they can hide behind a posture of neutrality. I was just doing my job, and I think this shows that it's very important for Trump to send people into these agencies and departments with a bulldozer or a blowtorch and a fumigator, because it's not going to be enough just to swap out a couple of people at the top. You're going to have to clean out the place from the bottom up.
Yes. So I wonder who has the skill sets to do that. And it may not be someone we know, right? Like, it's easy for me to be like, Ron DeSantis is the guy. Like, I don't know. Maybe he does have those skill sets, but maybe it's someone we don't know. But you're right. It can't just be, we have a new director of the deep state. No, that's not even close. Is it physically possible, though? Or like, are these, government workers that can't ever be fired, et cetera, et cetera? Like, can it be done physically?
It can be done, but you've got to approach it with a certain measure of ruthlessness. And by that I mean, you've got to go in there recognizing that there are many ways to kind of get rid of bureaucrats. Firing them is actually only one way. Demoralizing them and making their lives miserable is another way, because many of them will then leave on their own. You have to quash their idealism. Remove the illusion that they're serving the public. Make them into be the useless time servers and the grifters and sort of leechers off the public purse that they are. After a while, they begin to lose the enthusiasm for having that kind of job. and they decide to seek gainful employment elsewhere. So I think we've got to use a multiplicity of techniques. And firing is one of them. Decentralizing the government is a second. I like the idea of scattering these people and forcing them to move to the hinterlands. That will cause some of them to quit. And the third is simply to keep insulting them so that they essentially lose interest in their jobs and quit.
Yeah. Okay. So I vaguely remember when, because I wasn't really paying attention to politics yet, but George W. Bush won. And I remember him, and correct me if I'm wrong, but using his political capital to reform Social Security. And it didn't work, and it failed, and that was the end of it, and all of his capital was gone. Is that still a thing right now? Like, oh, you have one shot, Trump. Like, this is it, and if you blow it, it's over, and you're like pretty much a lame duck for the rest of your term. Or does Trump not care about that at all?
I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think the right way to look at it is to open the door to creative ideas for doing things that have been taken for granted for decades in a new way. A sample of this would be an idea that I saw David Sachs put out on X, where he was talking about auctioning off these licenses to the television spectrum. Why should ABC, CBS, and NBC have this sort of de facto monopoly where they get the valuable public airwaves essentially for free? It essentially allows them to act like a monopoly and have this kind of ideological truncheon that they use to beat up on our side, and we're letting them have it. Or even NPR, they get public money. Why should they get public money? They're an ideological arm of the Democratic Party. So I think if we take all these assumptions of American politics, turn every single one of them into a question, and then bring in creative people to think about, how do we change this? How do we fix that? How do we get rid of this? I think we could begin to see a new era of experimental government, of a kind that we haven't really seen since the early days of the New Deal.
Okay, that's interesting and fun. But I'm just thinking, what's your advice to conservatives moving forward? Because you brought up NPR. I'll pivot a little bit to PBS. I remember when Mitt Romney was running and he talked about cutting PBS funding. And everyone freaked out about Big Bird and little children everywhere. And don't you want kids to read? And Mitt had to be like, I love Big Bird, but, and it was like this whole thing. So the left's going to freak out about anything. And by the way, didn't like HBO buy Sesame Street, and now they put out like way more Sesame Street than they did even before, right? So like the free market won. But like, what is your advice to all of us?
Well, you started out this segment talking about the media, and I think that even though the media has diminished reach, it has not lost its power to control the agenda. We still react to the media, and in fact, we're so habituated to it that we think that refuting them and confuting them is kind of our main job. But we really know that we're winning when we can respond with indifference. Imagine if we treat the media kind of like one of these, homeless guys who comes up to you on the street, and starts like pestering you. What do? You don't engage. You look away, you politely say something, and you cross the street. You move on. So once we develop that trait, we won't be so worried about the media is going to say, oh, you're doing this, oh, you're doing that. We're not doing that, but we don't actually care what you have to say about it. Yeah. So you can keep saying what you're saying, and we hear you, but we're not really listening.
Yeah, that's right. That's the goal. Who is a person that you're excited to be in D.C. in a Trump White House?
Well, I would have to say Elon Musk, just because I think that this guy, this guy is a little bit like Trump. I think when God made Elon Musk, he threw away the mold. Same with Trump. So these kinds of singular figures are extremely rare, and they bring a rare combination of abilities. I have no idea what to expect bringing Elon Musk, importing him, even as a consultant, if you will, into the bowels of government. But I think whatever he's going to come up with is going to be very interesting.
Are you in California still?
No, I'm in Texas these days.
I remember when Newsom took over the governorship, And there was this whole big to-do that he appointed some Silicon Valley guy, and I forget exactly who it was, to reform the DMV in California. And this was, I don't know how long he's been governor, 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
And I can assure you, having been at the DMV about a year ago, no reform has been made, even by this big Silicon Valley guy at the DMV. So that guy's pathetic. Elon Musk sends rockets to Mars. So if anyone could do it, you'd think he'd be the one who could.
It is true that there are certain type of built-in problems in the government that there is no easy solution to. I mean, if you think of any government program, and I'll sort of simplify it sort of this way, let's say we take $1 from every American, we have $300 million, and we give it to one group to try out this or to do that. The program turns out to be horrible and we want to get rid of it. Well, the one group, which is getting $300 million, is going to hire an army of lobbyists to fight for it. Meanwhile, if we start making phone calls to every American to say, hey, you should mobilize against this program, they go, well, it only cost me $1. So the point is that the people who pay for the system are diffuse and put only a little into each program, whereas the beneficiaries have intense interests in protecting that program. Now, unless you figure out a way to break the logic of that, you're not going to address the problem, let's say, of cutting the size of government. You can have all kinds of good ideas and put out a blueprint. Here's it would be great if the government looked like this at, only half of its size. But you won't be able to get from here to there until you solve what economists call this public choice problem that I just described.
Yeah.